I think it's just going to get weirder and weirder and weirder, and finally it's going to be so weird that people are going to have to talk about how weird it is. Eventually people are going to say, what the hell is going on? It's not enough to say it's nuts. You have to explain why it's so nuts. The invention of artificial life, the cloning of human beings, possible contact with extraterrestrials, the systems which are in place to keep the world sane are utterly inadequate to the forces that have been unleashed.
Welcome back to Forbidden Knowledge News. I'm your host, Chris Matthew. Today my guest is Maya Zahira. First, check out my films, Doors of Perception. It's available on Amazon Prime. Occult Louisiana is on Tubi, Roku channel, Apple, and many more. Visit our website, forbiddenknowledge.news. It's the home of the Forbidden Knowledge Network. We feature some of your favorite podcasts and content creators. We are on the road filming right now, so there will be no video for this broadcast, and we are still trying to put out all the episodes we can this week. We hope you enjoy. We are booking guests for January. If you have suggestions or you'd like to be a guest, email me, forbiddenknowledgenews@gmail.com. Today, I want to welcome back to the show Maya Zahira. She is a visionary teacher, mystic, author, and spiritual mentor whose mission is to educate and empower truth seekers with the most powerful and effective methods for energetic self-care, spiritual empowerment, and psychic protection. Maya, welcome back. How you doing?
Chris, thank you so much for having me back. I'm really excited to be sharing some stories with your audience today.
I am very excited as well, and thank you again for being so flexible. As you know, I'm on the road right now, so we're trying to make do with what we have, and we're going to make it work. And really excited about today. We're going to be discussing your new book, Revealing the False Light Agenda, Firsthand Experiences with Imposter Entities in New Age, Religion, and Beyond. And in my perspective, this is a very relevant topic when we look at the state of collective awareness, the revelations of occult ideologies being imposed on society, and the encounters that we hear of. There has been much of what I would say are deceptive experiences that people have been reporting. And this has gone back to the beginning of our history, but the awareness is changing now that we have access to the internet and people being able to share their stories online and things of this nature. So I'm very interested to hearing your stories and finding out more. There's a lot to get to. Before we do, remind the audience just a little bit about yourself and let them know how they can find out more.
Sure, of course. I'm going to put myself on camera for just a moment just to say hi, and then I'm going to go back off camera because Chris is traveling and the internet signal wasn't so great with both of us on video. So I'm going to just wave and so you can see that I'm a person. I'm a real person.
Yes.
Hi, everybody. Okay, going back off.
Perfect.
Okay, hi, everybody. My name's Maya Zahira. And I know that my Zoom handle says nature lover, and it's kind of a funny story that I recently took my name and my photo off of Zoom because when I would be a guest on other people's Zoom classes, let's say there was like a group, whatever, for whatever hobby that I'm engaged with, when I would get on there and I would be off video, but just my name and picture would be on there, this sounds crazy, but anybody that had demonic attachments in the group, usually they didn't know that they had that, they would start freaking out. And it was very disruptive to the class. One time, this lady started yelling at me. It was a women's circle on Zoom, and she didn't even know me, but the demon was so triggered. So that is why my name and my picture are no longer on Zoom. I just changed the settings permanently. And it's kind of a wild world that I live in. So I'll go ahead and give some of my history here. So I have been a spiritual teacher for about 30 years now. And for the first 20 years, I was what I call a feel-good spiritual practitioner. It was like Reiki and happy stuff and drumming circles and like happy empowerment and all of that. And we need that in this world. So I'm not disparaging that. But that's where I hung out, was all the feel-good stuff, kind of the positive vibe stuff too, which is pretty unhealthy. And I was telling somebody the other day, if anybody had told me over 10 years ago that I would be working specifically in the field of spiritual protection, psychic protection, I would have told them that they were crazy, because I knew that this is a dangerous area. And I didn't want to work with clearing out negative entities. But what happened was in 2016, so almost 10 years ago, I unexpectedly experienced a major psychic attack when I went to a colleague, another spiritual teacher and healer. I went to her for a second opinion on a situation that I was experiencing, and I wanted to ask her opinion about psychic attack. I thought I was perhaps experiencing something minor due to a predatory person in our spiritual community. And so I went to her, just not even realizing that the horrors that were going to unfold after that, because she said that she was channeling 12 seraphim angels. And being a New Ager back then, I'm no longer a New Ager, but being a New Ager back then, I didn't even question that. I totally accepted that she was the human messenger for these 12 seraphim angels. What I didn't understand was that they were not 12 seraphim angels. It was, in fact, one Djinn, negative entity, one Djinn. A Djinn is a shapeshifter entity that was posing as 12 angels. And Djinn are so masterful at shapeshifting that they can shapeshift into multiple beings at once. And so if anyone wants the whole story, which we won't have time to go into today, you can read it in my first book, Darkness Disguised as Light. And so the very, very, very short version is that obviously I did survive that attack. But after I went to see her for this consultation, all of a sudden I was getting attacked by what I thought were demons, and my house was filled with negative entities. My lights were flashing, all this crazy stuff was happening. I was experiencing missing time and like bends in reality. The animals in my yard were all acting weird. Birds were following me. I mean, it
Wow, could
was
you tell us a little
crazy.
bit more in description about the time bending and some of the instances that you were experiencing because of this?
Yeah. Okay. So the time bending, what I'll say is I'll describe it to you, but anyone who's experienced a time bend, you kind of have to experience it. Like just hearing about it doesn't give it justice. So just imagine that, everybody. So there was one instance where and I might get the details reversed. So when you read the book, it might be opposite of this, but I woke up in the morning and the sun was shining and it was a warm day. And I'm trying to remember what time it was. And then I went back to sleep for what I thought was like 10 minutes. Okay. And then I woke up and it was 2 p.m. and the sky was dark. So it was the afternoon. The sky was dark. It was cold and it was raining. And I was like, where am I? What happened? And I know that you could say Well, maybe you just accidentally slept for a really long time and the weather changed. We could explain everything away, but all of you listeners who've had this super weird experiences, you know in your gut when something is weird, when it's not normal. And I had all sorts of protection at that point around my bed, but it was like this time warp happened and I was inside the protected zone and then stuff was happening outside of the protected zone. It was very weird. Again, difficult to describe and more of a feeling that you know that something has shifted, almost like you're not on the same timeline that you were on before, and you can feel it, but you can't prove it. Does that make sense?
It does. So how did this experience come to an end?
Yeah, so it came to a climax when about 6 weeks into being mercilessly attacked by multiple entities and not understanding what the heck was happening, I finally had the epiphany one day that it was coming from who I now call the angel lady, and from her entity. But I didn't understand. I thought she was helping me. Like still didn't understand until that moment when I picked up her book and I saw that there were demon faces all over her book. And I didn't see those before. You know how you could see something 1,000 times and it's like right in front of your face, but you don't see it until one day you see it. And the book cover had clouds all over. It was like image of clouds and angel wings. And all of a sudden I could see all these demon faces in the clouds. And I said, oh my gosh, this situation is coming from her. And that was when somebody re-suggested that it was a Djinn. Originally, somebody suggested that it was a Djinn. And here's the thing, I didn't believe in Djinn. And so I said, no, it can't be that. It's something else. And so this just goes to show that you can disbelieve, you can not believe in something, and that doesn't make it not happen to you. It still happened to me. So I finally realized, oh my gosh, this actually is a Djinn. This is a shapeshifter. And so then I reached out and texted one of the angel lady's students. And I said, I'm concerned. It was kind of vague. And I said, I'm concerned. Please be careful with whatever spiritual teachers that you're working with. And sending that text was a mistake because that night I was in a deep sleep and I was woken up by something grabbing me. And my eyes flew open, and above me, I saw the Djinn in its true form. It was a plasma-like energy, like electricity, hovering above me. And even though it didn't have a distinct form, I saw the energy reach forward, like as though it had arms. So it reached forward inside my shoulders, inside my body, and tried to yank my soul out of my body. And it was an indescribable feeling. Like it was so jarring. And then it did not succeed, thank goodness. I'm wondering if it was trying to do that so that it could possess me, but I'm too stubborn and I wouldn't leave my body. And so then I heard it say, this was the first time that I had ever clearly heard a Djinn communicate. And it was a booming telepathic voice inside my skull. And it said, don't mess with her. She's mine. And to this day, I don't know if it was referring to the gal that I texted, that I gave that warning to, or if it was referring to the angel lady, like, you know, she's this like possessive, she belongs to me kind of thing. I still don't know what it meant, but that's what he said. It was a male voice. And it was the most terrifying thing I had ever
Wow.
experienced. Yeah. And here's what happened. I was so terrified. I rolled onto my side in a curled up position with my arms over my head, and I hyperventilated. I was hyperventilating and sobbing, and like I consider myself to be a pretty brave person, but that was like, I didn't even understand what was happening.
Yeah.
Now, at this point, I've had multiple encounters with Djinn. So now, like when you know what's happening, that helps a lot. But it's a lot scarier when you don't know what this thing is,
Yeah.
And so I don't know when it left. All I knew was that my eyes were squeezed shut for a couple more hours until dawn. And then I saw the sun come up and I got out of bed and I called my friend and was so freaking out and crying so much she couldn't understand what I was saying.
Oh.
Anyway, after that, I did obtain some important information from a local metaphysical shop and from a spiritual mentor that I used to work with, who gave me a couple of little tips. And then I started to put some things together to clear the Djinn. And I did actually catch it on video. Shortly after that, I was doing an educational video for my students. I was leading an online program and I was teaching them some spiritual concepts. And in that video, you actually see this plasma pulsating energy that starts off really small and then it gets bigger and bigger and bigger over my shoulder. And I was so mad when I saw that.
Oh.
But eventually I was able to clear it. But it was just such a jarring experience, and most people didn't believe me.
Yeah. That's crazy. So, did you get back in touch with the angel lady and relay the information?
Great question. That is such an important question. And I anguished over that question for a couple of weeks because would think like, does she know that she's working with this negative entity? Does she not know? Is she just as much of a victim as I was and maybe some of her other clients? Because I think what was happening was clients were going to her for assistance with spiritual warfare, and then her entity was attacking them. And it was this whole smoke and mirrors illusory thing. But then I had a dream that told me to not tell her that it was not safe. And in the dream, I saw her at a metaphysical shop and I was really excited because I always liked her. I thought she was a great person. I saw her at this metaphysical shop in the dream and I was real excited to see her. And I went up to her and I told her, this is what's happening. You think you're working with angels, and it is not angels. It is this Djinn, blah, 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 blah. And I just spilled it all out. And then when in the dream, she looked up at me and her eyes turned completely black.
Oh.
Yeah. And then I woke up and I said, okay, message received. I do listen. I've learned that it's really important to listen to my dreams and to my intuitive nudges and my psychic hits. If I get a warning about something, I listen. So I never did tell her. Um, and I genuinely wish her well, but I realized that it would be very dangerous for whatever reason. I think she sort of knows. I Who knows? But it was not going to be safe for me to tell her.
Yeah. Wow. Well, let's get into your new book. Give
Yeah.
us a synopsis before we start to break things down.
Sure. Okay, so I want to give you a story that happened just a couple of weeks ago that really illustrates why I wrote the book. And this is a scenario that has happened like hundreds of times to me in different situations. So the details are different each time, but in this particular incident, I was on a Zoom call as a client with a counselor, and I was having a first session with her, and I was wanting to talk about a personal situation. And as we got about, maybe 20 minutes, maybe 30 minutes into the session, all of a sudden, now this was somebody that I thought was, pretty down to earth. Okay. And so I was really surprised that all of a sudden she said, "Wait, my spirit guides have a message for you." And I thought, oh no, this is like not what I wanted in a counseling session. And so I stopped her and I said, can we please not do that? I want to just talk with you. And she said, "Well, I'm really confused. Like, why would you not want a message from my spirit guides?" And so then I explained false light entities, deceiving spirits to her and how I know about this. And she just smiled and nodded. And it's the usual facial expression of they hear what I'm saying, but it doesn't click, and they don't believe that it applies to them. So that has happened like hundreds of times where I'll have an encounter with somebody and they will just not understand what I'm saying. They don't believe it. Oh, that doesn't apply to me. Only like people will only be deceived by negative entities if they're stupid or they have terrible discernment. And I'm just going to tell you all, false light entities, that's the term that I use for these imposters, dark beings. And there's a variety of different types of dark beings that pretend to be beings of light. This is so much more common, it's so much more prevalent than people realize. And so all these people that are channeling messages from their spirit guides and people that are channeling messages from, the alien council of whatever, or angelic councils and stuff like that, like this is all sorts of false light entities that are tricking a lot of people. And
Would you
I'll just say, yeah, go ahead.
across the board, all of the contact that people are experiencing is mostly false light entities, or is it a mixed bag? Are some people actually being contacted by benevolent beings?
Yeah, it's a great question. So some people who talk about false light will insist that every spiritual entity out there is negative, is false light. And as a lifelong clairvoyant, clairaudient, clairsentient, etc., and someone who now has the keen spidey sense for discerning false light because of the trauma that I went through, my perspective is that there are indeed benevolent, true, authentic, spiritual beings. However, there are tons of imposters, false light entities, pretending to be those beings also. So it gets very confusing, and a person has to have like the ultimate levels of discernment in order to not be tricked. And one of the stories that I'll share with you today in a little while really shows how tricky these entities can be. That story that I shared about the counselor, that has happened so many times. And I felt like ever since I went through my situation in 2016, I felt like I was shouting off the cliff, like, "Hello, echo, echo, echo. Is anyone hearing me?" And I was doing videos on YouTube, and I was talking about false light, and I would talk to individual people about false light. And people on my YouTube channel were receptive. Like the people that would end up there were interested in genuinely hearing about it. But what I would notice is that most people out in the world really didn't believe in it, or they thought it was just something rare. And so I had this situation I'm going to jump forward to some recent situations. I had a situation this past spring where a former client recontacted me. And by the way, in my book, to protect everyone's privacy and keep everyone protected, I've changed every name. So if anyone reads the book, if anyone reads it, they'll see all of the names are changed. So this client, who I will call Michael, used to work with me and had a false light entity, a very powerful one. And it did happen to be a Djinn, although Djinn are not the only types of entities that tend to shapeshift like this. Djinn are the most powerful, however. So this was a pretty powerful entity, and we had worked together for about 9 months back a couple years ago. And then all of a sudden, this client dropped off with no real discernible reason. But then Michael recontacted me this past spring and said that he was really struggling, that he unfortunately made some really serious mistakes and called the Djinn back to him. It might sound unbelievable that people do this, but if someone, like, there's this emotional tie that if you've had this entity with you for such a long time, because when we had been working together, the entity was almost completely cleared. And sometimes it freaks people out, like on a subconscious level, it's like this fear of what it will be like without the entity. And so Michael, unfortunately, called the entity fully back, and it was stronger than before. And it was not only stronger, but it was fully possessing Michael. And he was really needing help, and he was under constant bombardment and hearing the Djinn's voice in his head 24/7. And he told me when we met on Zoom that he stopped working with me because the Djinn, or this entity, which was a Djinn, but he was at the time being fooled, and I don't know what he thought it was, but it was a Djinn. The entity told him that I was bad and that Michael shouldn't work with me anymore. And this is a classic, even in the living human world, this is a classic move of an abuser. An abuser will manipulate and say, oh, you shouldn't be around that person, the person who's going to help you. You shouldn't be around that person. They're bad. And so that's why Michael had cut off contact with me. But he realized, oh my gosh, I'm in real trouble. So I fully intended to help Michael. And unfortunately, after I got off the call with him, I heard a voice. I'm clairaudient. I heard a voice that said, I will kill you.
Whoa.
And I thought, okay, whatever. Like, by that point, because this is like 2025, almost 10 years after I had the original Djinn attack that caused me to hyperventilate. So now 2025, I'm tough, like I don't fall for the tricks. I don't fall for the fear-based mental warfare. And I said, okay, maybe you will, maybe you won't. I don't really believe you. And so, but I saw it as a heads up, like, you need to do extra clearing right now before you go to bed. So I did. But Djinn are really tricky. They don't really respond believe it or not, demons are way easier to clear just with your authority or the authority of whatever higher power that you work with. Djinn do not respond to those boundaries and to that authority. So the middle of the night, I woke up and I had some exorcism music playing on my phone, and all of a sudden it shut off. The music shut off. I had that music playing just for good measure, for protection from this Djinn. But I knew, uh-oh, all of a sudden the music shut off. I better turn that on immediately, because we're more vulnerable when we're asleep because we're not awake and aware of what's going on in our environment. So I went to reach for my phone, and then I was overcome by the most severe vertigo. And I knew that the Djinn was causing it. And I heard the Djinn's voice, Michael's Djinn, and the Djinn said, "Do not help him." And I was like, okay, well, I don't normally negotiate with evil entities, and I don't normally have conversations with them. But I imagine being in the worst vertigo imaginable. I had fallen back down onto the bed. The room is spinning like intensely. And I realize, if this Djinn is going to continue doing this to me, I literally can't even live. Like, I can't even get out of bed. I can't do anything. And not only that, but I can't help anyone. I can't work with my clients. And then the Djinn said, "I will harm your students." And that sealed the deal for me. I usually don't believe, if an entity tells me something, I'm like, yeah, you're just trying to scare me. Like, I don't fall for it. It's BS. But in this case, I'm very protective of the people that I do work with, making sure that they're not exposed to anything that they don't need to be exposed to. And so there I am in bed with this terrible vertigo. And I said out loud, again, I don't normally negotiate, but I said out loud, "Okay, fine. I won't work with Michael." And then I said, I'll send him an email in the morning. And then the vertigo got worse. And I said, "Okay, fine, but you need to stop the vertigo so that I can get up and go to my computer." And so the vertigo subsided, and I was able to get up and go to my computer. And I spent some time sending an email. Of course, I felt bad. I wanted to help this person. But if I am under such severe attack, then I can't help anyone else that I'm trying to help. And I wanted to give this person resources, like, here's where else, some other people that I could recommend for you. But I knew if I tried to help at all, I would be attacked more. This is the only incident in 10 years where I have had to not work with somebody because I was being attacked.
Do you think this entity had more power than you had experienced with others?
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I talk about that in the book, that I was trying to figure out, okay, I've dealt with a lot of Djinn. Djinn are not to be trifled with. They are quite powerful. But this one, I had never been attacked like that by a Djinn. And I did feel that it was an extremely powerful Djinn. Most of the time when I had encountered Djinn that were above average in power compared to other Djinn, it was because the Djinn had been acting as a false light entity, posing as whatever being, ascended being or aliens or whatever, and working with a prominent spiritual teacher and channeling messages through them. And therefore the Djinn would have access to all of the followers of the teacher, and then the Djinn would become extremely powerful. So usually those were the cases when the Djinn would be extremely powerful. So I was really surprised that this Djinn was only attached to Michael, not a whole network of followers. And yet it had gained a huge amount of power. And it was definitely more powerful than most.
What would
And so,
be a
yeah.
desired outcome for these beings to essentially possess or influence a very powerful spiritual teacher that has a big following? Would it be to then influence that following with certain ideologies, steering them in certain directions?
Yes, that's part of it. So it's to misguide humanity by giving false messages. And then false messages are very sparkly and uplifting and all about like we can all ascend to 5D, and it's always like very inspiring, inspirational, and it sounds good, but it's to keep people asleep and from seeing the real truths of what's going on. It's intended to numb people out. That's just part of it, though, like the misguidance, intentional misguidance of humanity. The other reason why an entity like a Djinn or a demon would shapeshift and take on this role where they're connecting with a whole network of spiritual teachers, followers, is to feed off of the energy. So Djinn in particular love to feed off of the energy of worship. So this was really hard for me to wrap my head around, having been raised Catholic. And as an adult, I was no longer Catholic, and I was really also outside of the box of Christianity, although very accepting of it. It was really hard for me to believe that Djinn and other false light entities were even allowed to pretend to be Jesus and God and other prominent religious figures.
That's
And
interesting you said that. I've heard of a few abduction experiences recently where
yeah,
people are being taken by Jesus. I find that very interesting.
oh my gosh, that is fascinating. I'm going to sidetrack and tell a story of something that happened a little while after my 2016 Djinn attack. And this was when I was with a friend, and we went to a Christian church for like educational purposes. We were going there to listen to a talk. Again, I'm very like open-minded, even though I'm not specifically Christian anymore. And so we went to this talk. We're just sitting there. I'm sitting on the end because I don't like to be stuck in an aisle. I don't like crowds. So I'm sitting on the end. She's sitting next to me. And the speaker is talking at the podium. And all of a sudden, something hits me on the right side of my head, my right temple. It hit me so hard that I didn't even have a chance to think. My body reacted, and I grabbed my head and I said, ow, really loud. So everybody looked at me, and I had my hand over my right temple. And with my hand over my head, I looked up to see what the heck had just hit me. And I tilt my head, I look up, and I saw the largest Djinn I have ever seen to this date. It was as large as the entire congregation. And so with clairvoyant sight, this is what I saw. Another interviewer asked me a few years back, why couldn't anyone else see this entity? And I don't know. I think that trauma that I went through, that traumatic encounter with my own Djinn attack in 2016, for whatever reason, it opened up this ability to be able to see and discern Djinn. And like some people are amazing at playing the piano or accounting or gardening. This is my gift, is being able to discern Djinn. And not everyone has it. Even people who are professional psychics, they don't see it. A lot of them don't. So that's why I'm kind of like I'm like the flagship person going, hey, I want you to see what I'm seeing because you guys aren't getting it. So I looked up, I see this Djinn, biggest Djinn ever, literally the size of the church. and it's this pulsating electric energy. When I looked up with my clairvoyant sight, then claircognizantly, I immediately knew that this being was pretending to be God, and it was checking on its followers. What I learned gradually over the years in helping a lot of clients with Djinn and other types of spiritual issues is that Djinn in particular love to be worshipped. So that is why they will pretend to be angels, Jesus, God, other religious figures. They love to be adored. They just like eat up that energy. It's delicious food for them. So a lot of people talk about how there are dark entities that feed off of suffering and fear. And that is true. There are a lot of dark entities doing that, feeding off of fear. Djinn also will feed off of fear. They try to create fear and confusion, like especially if they can't get you to worship them, they will then turn scary. So Djinn will shapeshift and pretend to be demons or something else scary. So then you're scared, and then they feed off of the fear. So they'll feed off of either fear or adoration.
You mentioned demons. What is the essential difference between Djinn and demons and other false light entities?
Yeah, great question. So just for your listeners here, if you are a more visual learner, there's a whole section, there's a whole chapter on this where I break it down and I give a clear description of each, but I'll give a quick synopsis right now. So we've talked about Djinn so far. There's the book does talk a lot about a lot of encounters that I've had with Djinn, but they are not the same as demons. And I hear a lot of people like interchange and talk about them as though they're the same thing. And a lot of people do believe that they're the same thing. The Islamic Quran, the holy book, the Quran, talks about Djinn, and a lot of people, excuse me, a lot of people will assume, oh, that's just the Arabic word for demon. And I'm not a like a religious scholar or anything like that. I'm speaking from direct experience, and that in my experience, many, many experiences, I see that Djinn and demons are completely different beings. So Djinn are made of plasma. It looks like electricity or fire without heat. That's their natural form. And then they are the most skilled shapeshifters of our list of false light entities. Like I mentioned before, they can pretend to be multiple entities at once, or they can pretend to be one entity or one entity for a while and then shift into another. They will try to be scary, or they'll try to get you to worship them, and they love creating chaos. So they're going to try to confuse someone and lead them in the wrong direction. And so that's Djinn, these plasma entities that are the most skilled at shapeshifting. And then we have demons. Most people are very familiar with demons. There's actually a hierarchy of demons. So starting at the lower end of the hierarchy, we have demons that look like creatures. They can look like animals. They can look like gargoyles or like the flying monkey type of creature with wings. These are the lowest intelligence level of the demons. And then we have the mid-level demons in the hierarchy, which tend to have more human-looking characteristics. So, regular human height, arms and legs, standing upright, etc. But they will also have the demonic features. Most of the demons that I've seen actually have some type of horns. Sometimes they will have wings, but the thing that I notice the most is the horns. And sometimes their skin is either gray or reddish. The eyes are either red or all black. And then we go up the hierarchy to the highest level of demons. And these are the most powerful. And unfortunately, I have had a couple of encounters with those that are in the highest ranking level. They tend, when I see them, they tend to not look like the standard demons that I just described. Instead, they are either this like blackest black energy that's like a black hole that's going to suck you in. It's like pure evil. And then sometimes I would see them appear in a human form, but less of the demonic features, more just a an attractive human. And I'm going to put a little note here that after I'm done going through the next two types of false light entities, I want to come back and share a story about a high-ranking demon that I encountered that was shape-shifting as benevolent religious figures in a Catholic church.
Yeah.
So I'll come back to that, but I'll finish the list. So we have Djinn that are false light entities, demons. I described the hierarchy. They also like to shapeshift and fool people, but they tend to be less into the like mental trickery. Djinn are all about creating confusion. That's what they want to do. The demons, it's a little less severe. Let me think of what else I want to say. So as I go through this list, the Djinn are the most gifted in shape-shifting. They are the most convincing. Demons come second on the list.
So
And
what would be the difference between the desired outcome of the interaction between a demon and a Djinn? What are they essentially looking for from a human?
yeah, so with most of my encounters with with demons that were shape-shifting as false light entities, their goal was to create suffering. Their main MO is to feed off of suffering. Although the high-ranking demon, the story that I'm going to tell in a little while, that high-ranking demon was feeding off of worship energy, being adored. But the mid-range demons that I've encountered, those are the most common. The lower ranking and the middle ranking demons are the most common. The high ranking are very rare. And so most of the demons that are shape-shifting, they want to create suffering. It's all about suffering. And then with the Djinn, it's either suffering, worship, being adored, whatever. They'll take all of it. They are very possessive. Djinn are very possessive. They might even attach to a person and stay connected with them for multiple lifetimes. It's like a psychopath, like if a psychopath was in love with you and like it's not real love, it's like this murderous, I want to torture you kind of love. That's a Djinn. So it differs than demons.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So let's go on to the next on the list. Again, as we're going through this list, they are less and less masterful in shape-shifting. So we have ghosts. So I'll just define that. What I mean by a ghost is a discarnate human soul that has not passed on to the afterlife. They are still hanging out on the earth plane. Most ghosts are just trying to figure things out. Most ghosts are not masterful at shape-shifting, but there are a few that are either they just have a very mischievous personality, or they are outright evil souls that are still hanging out on the earth plane. So I've seen that whole spectrum. Just recently, I was helping someone get rid of a false light entity that was a ghost, that was just very mischievous and tricky. That was his personality. So thankfully, it was not a truly evil, dark spirit, and those do exist. So we were able to clear that false light entity from the client. So they are the least masterful in shape-shifting, and so it's easier to see through the tricks, where you're like, okay, like if you're paying attention and you're somewhat discerning, you can usually figure out that, oh, this is a spirit, that this is a human spirit. This is not whatever it's pretending to be. Whereas with Djinn being the most masterful, even if someone is extremely discerning, a lot of times they'll still be fooled. I'm going to add one more to the list, and this is kind of a catch-all category. We definitely want to mention that there are aliens that are shapeshifters. Reptilians are shapeshifters. There are other aliens that are like the Pleiadians and others, Arcturians, that people tend to really love them and think that they're wonderful, but they do shapeshift, and sometimes they will shapeshift to a form that will make the person that they're contacting more comfortable. And so I point this out so that just to get people to question everything. If you're having encounters with Arcturian beings or some other type of entities, just remember that even if they're sort of benevolent, they also have their own agendas. And sometimes there are so-called benevolent aliens that are shapeshifting as well. So keep your eyes open.
Very interesting. I was going to ask you about the alien thing, so thank you for that. Now, I know
Sure.
you wanted to tell another story. We've got some time left. We'll get to that, and I have a couple of questions to close out on.
Okay, great. All right, so hang on to your seats. I've got a major story for you. This happened a couple of years ago. I went to a conference at a Catholic church that was about an hour from my home. And I was really excited about going to it because, again, being very open-minded, I wanted to hear what their speaker had to say about spiritual warfare. And as many of us know, the Catholic Church knows a lot about exorcisms, and they have a lot to say about that. So I was very excited to go to this conference. They weren't teaching about exorcisms, but there was someone who had worked with an exorcist for a long time who was sharing some of her perspectives. So that was why I went. So that part of the story, that her talk, the speaker's talk, isn't really relevant to our topic today. So we're going to skip over that to the evening part of the conference. And the evening part of the conference was it's called Eucharistic adoration. For those who aren't Catholic, this is when the bread and the wine, which Catholics believe is actually Jesus, is actually showcased in a special fancy container that's up on the altar, and then people worship that. So they were getting ready to do Eucharistic adoration. There was a man that I had met earlier on in the day, and he said that he was working regionally. Him and his team, they would travel around and they would do deliverance. So he was not a priest. He was a lay person, non-priest. And he would go around with his team and they would do deliverance prayers, to release demons and negative stuff from people, and they would do healings on people. This is relevant because later, before the Eucharistic adoration began, he came up to the podium on the altar, and I was suddenly really confused because he dropped his head. And by the way, in the Catholic tradition, it is forbidden to channel entities. Okay. I know this. I was raised Catholic. It's a big no-no. So I was really confused when he dropped his head and I saw this really dark entity step like beside and behind him. And he dropped his head like he was taking a moment to get his composure. This is something that I've seen people on like the Gaia channel and other places where there's spirit channeling. They'll take a second and they'll like breathe, and then they lift their head back up, and then they start doing the channeling, right? So this is what he did. So he dropped his head, and then he lifted his head. And this entity, this super dark entity that later I realized was a high-ranking demon, like what I described earlier today. This super dark entity is standing behind him, and the man lifts his head and he starts talking. It's his voice. Clearly, it's his male voice, but he's speaking in a feminine tone of voice. And he's saying these very like generic things. Apparently he was channeling Mother Mary, and he was saying, and the man was saying, as Mary, I want you to worship my son, say the rosary every day, go to mass every day, receive communion, blah, 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 all this like really generic stuff. But I'm sitting there going, okay, I'm so confused. Why is he channeling this entity? Like, does he know? Like, what does he think that he's doing? And I can clearly see it. And again, nobody else can. And my mouth is dropped open. And it gets even freakier because then he finishes his message and he steps down. But this blacker than black, evil, pure evil entity is then left standing on the altar. And the lady in charge of the event comes up to the podium and says, please, everyone, come up to the altar, kneel before Jesus and worship him. And I swear I'm not creative enough to make this up. Okay. This absolutely happened. I'm sitting there. I'm in the back. Okay. I'm sitting in the back. Thank goodness. Almost everyone gets up and goes to the altar, in front of the altar. They kneel in front of the altar, and they're all kneeling with their hands in prayer position, and they're all praying. They're all praying and praying and praying to the Eucharist, to the bread and wine. And as they're praying, I'm seeing this like golden light that's emanating up from all of the people, and this evil high-ranking demon, that's what I believe it was standing in front of the Eucharist, and it was absorbing all of this prayer and worship energy that all of these people were emanating.
It makes me wonder how often this is occurring in churches.
I know. It really, like I've seen a lot of things. I've really toughened up over the last decade compared to that first Djinn experience. But I was floored because I was like, I just was shocked that like God or creator or like that's even happening. Like, how is that happening? At that point, I said, okay, I'm out of here. Like, I'm not sticking around any longer. I don't need to see what happens next. So I got up and left.
Because of things like this that many come to a belief that this realm that we're in is actually controlled by some of these beings, and it's some sort of prison planet or soul trap that these archonic entities are in control of. I don't take on that perspective. I think there's much more to it. But what would
Yes.
you say to people who do believe that?
I think that our reality is a lot more complicated. I think it's human nature to want to make something all one thing or all another thing. Like if you go to church, it's a safe zone. It's all holy. It's all good. That's all God and Jesus or whatever the religion is. Or there's the opposite people who are like, it's all archons. There are no good entities. There's no good in any religious or spiritual practice. It's all archons. It's all archons. My perspective from my firsthand experiences personally and with clients, like just hundreds of situations, I think that it's somewhere in between. Yes, there are many beings that are feeding off of humans. It's not just the archons. There are many beings feeding off of humans. There are also positive beings. There are also allies. And there are some spiritual beings that are kind of somewhere in between where they're not really evil, but they have their own agendas. So just like our human world is complicated. There are all sorts of people. Each individual person is complicated. No person is all good or all evil. We have a planet full of people who have all these different agendas. And the same thing is true in the spirit world and in the alien world as well. It's not so simple. We can't just polarize to one side or the other.
Right on. Well, to close out, let's talk about how we could become aware of some of these entities if they are attracted to us in some way or attempting to connect with us in some ways. How can we become aware? Is there a way to test the spirits? Is there something that would attract them specifically that we should be avoiding?
Absolutely. So for anyone who does read the book, there's a whole chapter at the end that gives a lot of tips. So you can refer to that. And I'm going to go over right now some of the signs that an entity you are connecting with is most likely false light. So it's either a Djinn or a demon or some other type of negative being. Okay. So a lot of people don't want to believe these things because they think that what they're experiencing is so awesome. But sooner or later, like that former client, Michael, you could find that you are really stuck in a terrible situation. So it's better to really take in these signs and really take this seriously. So sign number one is that if you have a spirit guide or some other being that's communicating with you in a very loud, booming voice, either you're hearing the voice in the room with you or you're hearing it inside your head, either way, if it is loud, that is 100% sign that you are dealing with not just a false light entity, but it's probably a Djinn. True, authentic, benevolent communication from the spiritual realm tends to be much more subtle. Sign number two is similar in that if you are having visual experiences with this entity where you're seeing it, false light entities of all kinds tend to overcompensate for the fact that they're not true light. They are dark beings. So they will make themselves appear as very brilliant light. So they might show up as an alien or an ascended master or whatever, but they have this like brilliant, blinding light, usually white light emanating from them. And there are actually religious stories of people having encounters with, like, apparently God, and it's this brilliant light that's blinding. That's probably a false light entity. That's not actually an authentic benevolent being. Every encounter or situation that I've observed or experienced where it was a brilliant light appearing, it was across the board. Every time it was a false light entity. They overcompensate by making themselves very alluring, like so beautiful and amazing. And that for human beings, like, we see this like beautiful image and we're just like overcome with awe, and we assume that this is an authentic thing that we're seeing, but it is a trick. Sign number 3 is if you question the being to find out if it is authentic, a false light entity will immediately become defensive. Although I will say there are some that are really tricky that won't become defensive. They will try to convince you even more. Oh, no, I'm actually who I say that I am. But if it does get defensive, that is 100% sign you know that you're dealing with a trickster. So if it becomes defensive when you question it, you need to shut that down. You need to set the boundary and move that entity out. Stop working with it. Ignore it. Get some help from a professional or whatever you need to do. Defensiveness, no true, authentic, benevolent entity is going to be defensive or authoritarian with you. Number 4 sign is if it lies and manipulates. I had a student many years ago, actually a couple years after my original Djinn attack. She came to one of my classes and she said, Maya, do spirit guides lie to you? I don't understand. Like, the spirit guide started working with me recently and it talks really loud in my head. And it tells me to do things, and then I do those things, and then I've gotten in trouble. I actually had to go to jail because I listened to what this Djinn told me, or what this spirit guide told me. And in her case, she was dealing with a Djinn. It was pretty serious. An authentic, benevolent being is not going to lie to you. It's not going to manipulate you. It's also not going to try to control you. It's not going to be super controlling or possessive. Okay. Number 5, I've had a lot of people argue with me over this one. Number 5, red flag, is bliss or euphoria. People will say, but there can't be anything wrong with bliss and euphoria, Maya. Those are good things to experience. No, what happens is something that one of my past mentors used to call spiritual anesthetic. Spiritual anesthetic is when a dark entity, whether it's just a pure dark negative entity or it's posing as a being of light, either way, it will emit, it will connect with the person, and it will emit frequencies of bliss and euphoria to get the person so blissed out that they don't realize that a negative entity is attaching to them. And bliss and euphoria, when you go to some spiritual event and all of a sudden you're just being filled with all of this bliss flowing through you, that event is probably chock full of entities that are in real time hooking into all of the participants, and you need to leave. You need to get up and leave and go get your butt on the ground and ground yourself. And then the final red flag that I'll share is that you know that it's a false light entity if that entity has been showing itself in one form, and that for, like, let's say it's, I have a story in my book about somebody who had this spirit guide who used to appear as in the form of a homeless man. And it was this very nice, very sweet, kind homeless man. And for the whole time that she was growing up, it appeared this way to her. And then when she was a young adult, it appeared to her as a homeless man, and then it shifted into Archangel Michael. And it said, I'm actually Archangel Michael. I was just appearing in that other form because I didn't think that you were ready yet. I'm going to tell you, the authentic Archangel Michael does not do that. So anytime you have a spirit guide or some other entity that starts off in one form and then it changes. There was another colleague of mine that was being bombarded and harassed constantly by a group of demons. And she was a heavy drug user at the time. And that was what weakened her aura and enabled all of these demons to come in. And then she started to clean herself up. And then she says that the demons actually changed. They changed form so that now they're angels. Those are not angels, okay? They are, and I haven't done a psychic read on it, but they're either demons or Djinn. Either way, they were shape-shifting into all of those forms. So if it starts off in one form and then changes, huge red flag. All of these red flags, like I said, can be difficult for some people to accept, especially if you have a lot of emotional attachment to whatever entity or spirit guide that you've been working with, or you're very attached to, being a prominent channeler, channeling certain messages. I'll just finish by saying that when I moved to Arizona, I went to a New Age gift shop. And when I went there, I walked into the back room area where they had some artwork for sale. And when I walked back there was a false light entity. I could see all this weird hazy light back there. And I heard this high pitched frequency in my ear, which is another indication of false light entities. And I told it, don't follow me home. Like, I don't want you. But this was a Djinn and they don't respond to boundaries. Anyway, skipping over most of the story, I will get to the relevant part here, which is that entity it tried so hard to convince me. So that night, it appeared as a whole group of ancient gods and goddesses from the ancient pantheon, right? So all these gods and goddesses. And it was like, we are here to protect you from that entity that you encountered at the New Age store. And I said, no, I don't think you are. Like, I'm not falling for it. But it had never encountered somebody like me who knew about Djinn. And so I was like, leave me alone. And I went to sleep. Again, I'm a lot tougher now, right? So I said, leave me alone. And I went to sleep. Middle of the night, I woke up and this entity was saying, we are the Council of Orion. You could be a very important spiritual figure in the world if you channel these messages to all of humanity, and you could help all of humanity by channeling. We really are the Council of Orion. And I kept saying, no, you're not. For hours, it kept saying, you can really trust us. We're the Council of Orion. So it was trying to tap into my ego, like you could be really important. Yeah. And I remember thinking, wow, these Djinn. So I know I'm talking a lot about Djinn because they are the most prominent false light entities. If anybody has issues where their ego can be easily manipulated, or maybe they have a low sense of ego and they like want to be boosted and they want to be more important, there are a whole lot of people who fall for that. And I thought, wow, this thing is trying to be so convincing. Like, if I didn't know any better, I would have fallen for it. I totally would have. And then finally in the morning, it shape-shifted into demons because it realized it couldn't fool me in the other ways. So then it tried to scare me.
Yeah. This is such great information. To close out, maybe give us any final thoughts, and also remind the audience how they can pick up the book and find out more about you.
Yeah. So one big message that I want to leave everybody with is the idea that in our world, we've been taught to look to others, to other authority figures for answers, whether that's looking to spirit guides, looking to God, looking to, like as a child, we were taught to look to our parents, our teachers, our authority figures. It has been drilled into us since we were young. So it can be hard to shift that since we've always been that way. But I really want to encourage people to do some self-evaluation and just with curiosity and not judgment, but just curiosity, notice any ways that you are looking outside of yourself for answers. So when you need answers, are you trying to get answers from your spirit guides? Are you trying to get answers from some type of higher entity? And so I would just invite you to start thinking about connecting with your own soul, with your own divine spark of essence, whatever you want to call it, to connect within, to find your answers. Because then when you are connected within in a very grounded and centered way, it's less likely that you will be fooled by trickster entities. All of these people who are looking outside of themselves all the time for answers, those are the easiest targets for these false light entities. So how to connect with my book and some of my other offerings. So I actually have 4 books, and this is my most recent one, Revealing the False Light Agenda. There are also a couple of other books about understanding abuse of spiritual teachers. There's another one about how to protect yourself from psychic attack and entity intrusions. So there's a whole gamut. You can find those on Amazon.com and also Audible. And if you are wanting to work with me one-on-one or in a group, then you would go to my website, psychicprotectionsanctuary.com, and you can find more information about that. And also when you go to the website, if you enter your email, you'll receive a free quiz to determine if you are experiencing any type of psychic attack or negative spiritual interference. So it's really good for everybody, I think, to do an evaluation to find out where you are, if you need to address any negative spiritual activity in your life.
Excellent. Maya, thank you so much. This was great information. We will definitely have to do this again in the future. And until next time, everyone, have an excellent evening. We'll talk again tomorrow. And we'll see y'all then.